All right, we're back in business. Okay. So let's just quickly go over like what the assignment is again, and then I want to show you an example from last year of what a four is. Um, so if you want access to this slideshow that I'm going through, you can find it via uh, the wonderful world of Canvas. If you went to modules and then just access the weekly podcast slideshow presentation. And then also all of the things that we're going to be talking about in the slideshow are also, I put them on the creating a podcast rough draft. So you'll notice once you get here that the goal of today is to create a rough draft and to bring that to class Thursday and Friday. And all of the resources that we're going to talk about in the slideshow are here embedded in kind of the assignment there. Okay, so you have a couple options of where to access this information from. The majority of today is to just work on your rough draft, but let me show you some just resources. Just to review that you need to create a podcast. It's 3 to 5 minutes. It can be longer. Please keep it under 10 minutes. The purpose of the podcast is to answer these 3 questions. Where do you want to be at the end of the year, at the end of high school, and as a young adult? And then talk about the things you're going to need to do to get there. And some of you are going to do a narrator-driven podcast because you're working by yourself. Just remember, if you do a narrator-driven podcast, that you do need people in your podcast besides yourself. So that can be friends, family, or people from the internet. And in the example today, I included part of a TED Talk to kind of show you how to do that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 10 of you have already identified that you want to work with somebody else. You're probably going to do a conversation style podcast. When you're just having a conversation back and forth. And I gave you an example of that on Friday or last Monday, Tuesday before Thanksgiving break because we didn't have Friday. And then on the assignment sheet, it just talks about why you need to use sounds, how you should use sounds to transition between things. And then there's just some structural things like you need an introduction. And then you need to talk about what your podcast is going to be about. Mr. Bauman's going to work with you today and tomorrow about how to identify the theme of your podcast and to work that into your introduction. Okay. So what's new today that we're going to talk about is just the rubric. And then I want to show you an example of a highly proficient one podcast from last year. So if we're looking at the ye old rubric, and we're just going to talk about what a 4 is because I'm assuming that that's what most of you want to achieve. So it needs to be effectively organized, focused, and compelling. Compelling just means interesting, okay? So that means that you present the ideas in an articulate and sophisticated sequence. And that just means that you're well-spoken and that you've arranged things. And so as you're going through your podcast, things aren't random, they just build on each other. And you're using both your voices and sounds in a skillful way. So that's kind of talks about that you're using transitions well. You have music or sounds that signal moods or transitions and that kind of thing. And that you're speaking clearly, that kind of stuff. So the next one is that you use effective tone, enunciation, and delivery. So that's just means that when you're talking, you're at a consistent tone. You've kind of leveled out all your sounds, and we can hear you clearly what you're saying. And then the production of your podcast is seamless. So there's no like gaps. Okay. So that's what you would need to get a 4. So let's kind of listen to the beginning part of a podcast that was created last year on a different topic, but kind of exemplifies these characteristics. Okay. And so some of you have already heard this because it was in the examples of what you could, when we were kind of just looking into a podcast in general. Okay, so I want to highlight a couple things about this one. So first, they start off by introducing all of the people that are in the podcast. And it's primarily this person's father and her younger sister. And they're going to be talking about a dog. We're not going to listen to the entire podcast, but I do want to kind of, if you want to go back and listen to the entire thing, I want to highlight some of the cool structural things that they did. So the title December 31st, 2017 is actually, um, I guess a spoiler alert, but it's when the dog died. So we have a sad ending. The dog's going to die, and they died on that date. But you'll notice that they built towards that, and so they're starting the podcast just kind of describing how they got the dog and the role the dog played in their life, and they're building towards that end with the dog's death, which is the real kind of point and theme of the podcast, to celebrate his life. So let's just listen to the first couple minutes of it to kind of highlight some really good things that they're doing. You'll notice that they use sound really great, that they're changing the sounds to signal different moods, and that the production of this is really kind of seamless, right? Okay, so let's listen to just the first part.
I am Fiona Rose McDonough, sister of Sophie Ann McDonough.
My name is Ryan McDonough, and I am Sophie's father.
I was 9 years old.
Let's see, so that was December 31st of 2017. So, make me do math here. Let's see, so I would have been 41? Yeah.
He was red and fluffy.
Billy was a Cavalier King.
Do you notice that they just switched the sound there? Because now they're going to start talking about the dog. So in the background, they kind of went from this kind of whimsical kind of music to a different type of sound in the background to kind of shift what they're talking about.
Charles Spaniel.
Had some like white fur.
Ruby coloration, which was the kind of the most rare of the colorations for that breed of dog.
And he had big eyes and droopy ears.
So his fur was sort of a reddish brown. He had sort of the classic spaniel ears, the kind of lay down. He had long, sort of, would get curly, wavy hair, especially on his ears. We usually kept his hair shaved short.
And his tail was always wagging.
Okay, so yeah, so they're just starting describing the dog, right? And then they're going to talk about how the dog played a role in their life, and then eventually how they had to put the dog down. And I just wanted to provide this with you for an example of what kind of your end product should, the quality of the end product look for. Okay, so that's there for you. Then let's look what else is here. So here's this. We went over this on Monday before break. But somebody sent me a sample script of what theirs might kind of look like, and I just clipped out the beginning part because I thought, and they color coded it like I did, right? So they had some introduction music, and then they wanted to talk about who they were, and then this podcast is about this person has ADHD, and so they're talking about their background, how they were active, and then they started school, and they switched the music here to kind of indicate that school wasn't the great thing, and then being diagnosed with ADHD, and then how that went. But you'll notice this red part. So they're outside source because they're not doing an interview. They wanted to include part of a podcast. So they identified what the podcast is so they could easily find it. And then they put the part of the podcast of the TED Talk that they wanted to include. So you'll notice that this TED Talk is over 15 minutes long. They didn't want the whole thing. They just wanted to clip out a couple minutes of it, right? And then they went into the first part, what they wanted to do by the end of the year. They want to be organized and productive, both as a person, as a student, and kind of how their action plan there. So there's another example of what a script could be. And then, so some of you are already proficient at using audio editing software. Some of you might not be. So if you're curious about how to take a script like here, I just took that script, and there's a tutorial here. And if this is helpful, great. If it's not, then perhaps you're not there. But this just talks about how you could take the script here, and then how you would go about turning it into just a very rough draft of an actual podcast. So if you're interested in that, if that would be helpful, that resource is available to you. So what we need to accomplish today is for you to just create a rough draft of your podcast. It should include all 3 questions. It doesn't have to be perfect, but what you want to do is be able to come to class on Thursday for you guys with a completed draft that you can share with some people in a breakout room to get some feedback on. If you don't want to access these resources via the slideshow, just remember that you can also access it through the modules and then creating your podcast rough draft. And all the instructions and the resources are there for you. But I wanted to give you the majority of the period just to get it done and to check in with you one-on-one to see where you are, because I know that we're all at various different places in this process. Is there any questions? Again, just goal of today, create a rough draft, a recorded rough draft, not just to take your script and to turn it into a podcast. I'm going to check the chat to see if there's any questions. Anybody have any whole group questions? Okay, well, I'm going to shoot you into breakout rooms. There's some of you that wanted to be together to work together. It'll take me about a minute to get there. And make sure I check in with you today. Hope you had a good break and that you're feeling well. A couple of you had to leave early, so I went through that quick so you get it.